Great. Welcome to this talk. This talk is going to be great. This talk, you are going to think back on your deathbed. You're going to look back at the life you lived, the years you spent on the planet Earth, and you're going to measure that life in terms of before this talk and after this talk.
Right. Yeah.
My good friend Doug Purdy said I wasn't using enough hyperbole in my talk, so I thought I'd get off on the good foot with my manager since he's writing my review this year. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk for an hour and 15 minutes about Quadrant. As you all know, Quadrant is an integral part of Oslo. Oslo is the way we are doing modeling. It is the next wave of technology we're building at Microsoft to allow you to build data-driven applications, data-driven frameworks, data-driven runtimes. The bottom of the stack is these three pieces. We're doing a lot of other stuff on top, but what we care about in the core of Oslo is the modeling language, which is M. We've had talks on that before. We got another talk coming up on that tomorrow with my good friend Chris Anderson and Gio Della Librera. You should go to see that. We have a talk on the repository in this, I think it's in this very same room.
In this very room. You can just stay here, relax, and see it.
With the great Chris Sells and Martin Gudgeon. And then this talk is where we're going to talk about the tool. And so what we're going to focus on is how people connect to all of this information. So let's talk a little bit about why we did Quadrant. I always like to think about, when I look at a technology, I like to contextualize it and figure out why the people who built it, because it helps me use it better. The Oslo is based on this premise that we want to move more and more of the software artifacts, the definition of software, into the realm of data that's transparent and dynamic versus code, which is opaque and often very static. So the base premise we have in Oslo is we want to move to a world where software is data. And so what that means is if we are successful, and we've been successful as a platform for the last 15 years, and we're getting more successful. We hope we're going to be even more successful with Oslo. As we get more traction with this idea, the volume of data that we have to deal with goes up. Right? There are massive amounts of data right now. If I look at a typical WF, WCF, WPF application that I'm writing today, using today's technology, I have a growing amount of data that I have to deal with. I've got a lot of XAML documents that contain both my UX definitions as well as often my logic if I'm using the workflow engine. I've got lots of the configuration system both in my app.config or my web.config, depending on how I do it, as well as in machine.config and God knows where else. There's already a universe of data I have to deal with that I have to think about to make sure my software works correctly. And we think it's only going to get more so. That's one of the reasons, by the way, we're investing in building a SQL-based repository. Because we want the ability to write queries across that vast amount of information and pull it together and get the data in a form I can interact with. But it turns out people want to do that too. Right? I, as a user, as a human being, right, I want to walk up to the system and be able to issue queries against all of this information and be able to see with it and interact with it and edit it in ways that make sense for me. Right? And that's the reason we built Quadrant. Right? Quadrant is the way I interact with the data that's in the repository that's driving these runtimes. And it is the connection between the people and the platform. Cool. So, what is Quadrant? Quadrant is a tool for interacting with data. That's what it is. Quadrant is a tool for interacting with data. It connects people to the data that's driving their applications. Quadrant gives me flexible design surfaces where I can pull together a set of data and interact with it and get my mind and my eyes and my experience very focused on that. I can walk up to arbitrary data that I may or may not know about a priori. So I can point Quadrant at an arbitrary repository that has arbitrary models in it and interact with it in useful ways without doing anything special, without having to go write any code or set any special config. However, when I want to have a very tailored view that's all about me, when I want the Don box special, right, the way that Don likes to interact with that data, I have a way to go off and create those experiences within the tool, right? And the tool, those of you know, some of you have been in the industry for a while, we're very influenced by things like Smalltalk, where I've got this very all-inclusive environment where it's all dynamic and it's all self-consistent, right? And I want that experience to be in the environment as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend most of this talk using the tool, seeing what it can do. And I can think of no person on the planet Earth better at showing the wonder that is Quadrant than the great Florian Voss, also known as Flovo. Flovo?
Thanks, Don.
Flip the video.
Don, that intro was great. Thank you. It made me really feel warm and fuzzy. Because I was always hoping that if I was giving a talk in LA, it might be at the Oscars. So that's not happening. But you guys are great, too, so I love to be here.
And Florian, unless I'm mistaken, you are on IMDb.
I am on IMDb. You can look me up. It's in my movie. But that's for the Q&A session later.
As is Doug Purdy. Doug Purdy's
yeah.
on IMDb as well.
We don't often work together, though, in the movie business.
Different genres.
So actually, I do want to change personality, though. Not personality, but my type. I imagine myself to be applying for a job in your company, and you hire me after I fooled you in the interviews. And then you say, hey, you worked on, at Microsoft, you know a little bit about Oslo. So why don't you take the point at our first Oslo project? And what we want you to do is we want to use workflows and services, so we want to understand how that works a little bit. But one thing that is really, really key for us is that we actually solve the business problems of our customers. So keep that in mind. So then I go and say, OK, I write a little model for goals, for business goals. Right? It is a model. It doesn't have to run. And I will now go into Quadrant and show you that business model, show you some experiences over it, explain to you how the tool works, and then also show you how that actually relates to workflows and service-oriented applications, because you will author those in Quadrant as well. OK, so here is Quadrant for the first time in public. This is what it looks like. It is an Office-like application. It has a ribbon UI at the top, and it has a data bar at the bottom. And I will go to the Explorer now and show you the first view from a graphical tool into the repository that you've ever seen. You can see we have a Browse All button right now. That Browse All button reflects over all the schemas that are in my repository now. And here they are. There's some Quadrant schemas, there's some system schemas, there's a workflow model, there's a whole lot of stuff there, right? And there are also instances for all these things. I'm showing this to you just to illustrate that we're true to the database, we really work with it, but the customer experience most likely is going to be through something that is a little bit more friendly and more tagged. Since you asked me to work on business-related stuff, I created a business category here, and in that business category right now, I see business goals and people. Those are the two models that we will spend a little bit of time with now, okay? And the Explorer here allows me to browse the content, so I can actually see that for this project, I assumed happy customers, great people, and great products would be a good set to get us started with. And this Explorer is a little bit like a file open dialog in spirit. Though actually the file open dialog has gotten really rich now, so that analogy doesn't work so much anymore. But the idea is if you have a beautiful big screen, so squint here and imagine that this was not 1024 by 768, but really, really huge. Then you want to really work with data on the main surface of the application, which we call the workspace. So I'll take my business goals, and I'll drop them onto this workspace canvas. And then I will zoom it to 100%. OK. So this canvas here now shows me my business goals in a very simple list view. That is the most basic experience you can imagine. But I get to choose from many other views. For example, I can go to a standard table view. So I'll make the switch. And now you can see that there are actually a couple of fields in my business goals schema. There is the name of the goals themselves, and there's a little bit of descriptive text. This is a reflection view, so it's standardized. That's why these columns are not ordered yet in the right way. We'll fix that later. OK, so that's one view. A table makes a lot of sense if you want to reason over a set of things, right? Another thing that I can do is I can switch this view here to a tree view. So let's look at what that would look like. So I see my business goals again. And now what I can do is I can drill in to the sub-goals. You can also see for happy customers, for example, I have some priorities. I think great support and fast service is a little bit more important than the right pricing structure. Because if you do a good job, they will pay. So the idea of the tree view is I can really explore deep what relationships my model has to other models, right? For example, I can go deeper here, great support, and I can actually see that this is owned by a person, by Karen. Okay, so 3 different views to deal with sets of data. Now I want to actually look at a business goal itself. So let's take the happy customers here. And you can see when I hover over an icon, it always gets a little bit bigger because icons for us are a little bit like hyperlinks in the browser. I almost want to call them hyper icons. Whenever you see those guys, you know you have a handle to a model entity, and you can interact with that. So I can take it, for example, and drag it out onto the workspace. And now what I'm doing is I'm opening another view, which is a property form of this entity. Okay? And you can see that I'm showing my 3 goals right now just as a count of those 3 guys, right? And you've seen the table already. And the principle of Quadrant is that whenever you see an entity icon anywhere, you can choose what view you want to use to visualize that. If I had fully customized this tool, you would have not seen it like that. I just did this for effect. So let me go in here on goals and see that while I'm on the business goals entity, I'm getting a property settings tab as well. That gives me some customization opportunities for the property form. They're very limited right now. We're clearly in the beginning of the project. But one of the things I can decide is I can decide how I want to view this item here. And I will pick the table that we had fun with before. And now in my form, I see the goals directly in place. Right? So I did composition as an end user. Then I will go to business goals and say I want to save this view. Because from now on, whenever I encounter a business goal, it will appear like that to me. Okay? All right. So that is composition inside a viewer. We also do something that is pretty cool. We allow you to take the set-oriented viewers and the property viewers and put them together in a combined layout. Let me just move this guy over a little bit here and switch the view here into a standard tree and detail view. Okay? So now what I'm getting is I'm getting the tree here on the left side. And as I'm selecting an item, I get the form view, or the default view, actually, for that item in place. So I can really easily browse through my collection of data here. And let's go down a little bit more. If I go to an individual goal here, and if I go to the owner, I want to quickly see who Karen is, then we will also load the property form for Karen in place. Right? All this is happening without me having to write a single line of code. Right? This is all provided by the tool, so you get a pretty good default experience right out of the box. Now let me take another goal here, the great people goal, and drag that onto the canvas as well. Because reading text is great, and looking at forms like that is fun too, but we observed that in many domains, diagrams are a key way to interact. So what I will do here now is I will switch the business goals into a diagram view. All right? So now you get a tree view that shows you what you want to accomplish. Great people, so we need to have a great college presence so that we can pick them up there. We need to be very efficient when we hire them, and we need to do fast onboarding as well. Right? So this is a diagram that technically is just showing me shapes right now. We call these guys here shapes. But if I want to see the structure and a little bit more information as well, I can fall back onto the hyperlink principle that we talked about before. So this is an icon here, so I know I can manipulate it. And what I can do is I can go to diagram settings, and I have the same view as ability that I had in the form before. I can just say, I would like to see this shape here with the standard properties form. Okay? And now we basically nest the properties right in place. And this property form has all the attributes right now, or as many. There could also be a smaller set of properties shown to get a little bit more richer than a shape, but a much more, but a still structural view of the system, right? So I can do this for all 3 guys here. There will be in the product also a view all as. So I can have some fun here, and I can really begin to see structure. Again, the bigger your screen is, and we know that they're getting cheaper, the more fun you will have with these kind of composed views. Okay. So this is my great people view here. And I showed you how I customized to get some nesting. On this view here, I can also customize the diagram presentation itself. So for example, I can rotate the diagram. Let's just do that. And now I get a tree like that, right? The layout is a little tricky here. I think if I switch this guy into a shape as well, we're going to look a little more smooth. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I would really like this line to connect at the top.
Florian, there's never been a defective piece of software shown at a PDC. This is the first time.
Well, actually, this software happens to be a little bit smarter than I want it to be. Because capturing these goals in the repository is so meaningful because it allows us to link it up to the implementation artifacts that we're using. And see what this super smart error here is doing. It hones laser sharp to the implementation relationships to evaluate an onboard employee workflow. So I'm scared a little bit. Apparently, my devs have made this thing self-learning. But that's clearly what must be going on here. OK, so as I've done this, I could also go, by the way, and say if I want to talk to Kim here, again, an icon, I can drag her out and get to see more contact information, get to see what other tasks she might be working on, to see if there are any conflicting interests, if I have all the time that I deserve from her as a developer. And yeah, so I do all this good stuff here. And now I want to zoom out a little bit, because what we've done is we have placed a couple of artifacts on this workspace canvas. We think of this very much like an artist's lab, or I don't know if you ever went on an art walk where you went into a pottery studio or something. They have these big tables where they have various artifacts in various stages of process. And that's kind of the model we had in mind for the workspace. Because we know you're working on things side by side. You compare things. You compare a workspace, a workflow with the application that it's running in. And we wanted to make that really seamless. So then when we developed that idea, we also thought, or we discovered that it's actually a pretty good way to organize your work, even if you just want to work on one artifact at a time. So I'm looking at the workspace right now, and clearly these guys are just rough outlines of what I see. But we have gestures that allow me to pop them to the front, so I can start working with one of them. Or I can also start working with both, and then I can pop them back into the canvas where they belong, right? I can also maximize an entity just by double-clicking it. And then I get to see a view in place, and I can start working with that thing a little bit, and then snap it back to where it came from. Hypericons. What are the two things that or what is the main thing that you do with a hyperlink? Well, you click on it and you navigate, right? That makes a lot of sense in the internet because artifacts are connected to each other, and the same is true here in the repository. So just as I dragged things aside, I can also double-click and move to an entity in place. So let me go to Kim here. We're navigating to Kim. I can see what she's all up to. I can go to the efficient hiring processes here and drill into that artifact. And then I can say, OK, I kind of understand that, and then use the back-forward buttons here to go back where I started, right? So every little one of these work paths here is a browser. So again, a lot of flexibility in how you customize, how you explore, and how you relate to data. These workspaces afford another thing. They can actually be saved. Because often, as a person that collaborates with other people, you have to prepare yourself for a review of some work that you've created, just like I do today on stage. And so for that scenario, you can actually save a workspace with a certain arrangement of items and load it at the right time. So let me do that. I will open a workspace here, workflows and services, and I will now transition to some artifacts that actually represent running or that actually drive runtimes that we created. So on my right here is Kim again. She is my guiding anchor. She's the person that manages the requirements. And you already saw by this clever error that the efficient hiring processes here are actually implemented with a workflow. This is the workflow. If I click on its contextual UI, you can see a gallery of all the activities. There are few. People were asking this in the workflow talk. We're, of course, building many. You can extend your own. And this workflow is a full workflow that was authored in the repository, that was authored in Quadrant as a model. We can export this to XAML to get two-way interactions with Visual Studio, but we can also fully work with this workflow in Quadrant. In fact, one of the things that Don alluded to in the beginning was that we want to organize a lot of data and we want to explore a lot of data. And we make it really easy to not just see one workflow, but really all the workflows that are part of your project, right? So there, if I look at them, there are a couple of others. Just like I did with the goals, I could bring them onto the canvas as a collection and reason over them, see where individual activities are used across my workflows, and really reason over my universe. Okay, so that is a workflow. And when we think about how we run workflows, we deploy them as part of services, as part of service modules into applications. And to make that easier, we are working on a service model, an application model. So let me zoom over a little bit and bring that into focus here. So this HR Hire Review application is actually the application that is hosting this workflow. We came up with some principles. So an application is composed of modules. Let's take a quick look here. Application is composed of modules, and modules have connection points, and connection points have contracts, the standard service approach, right? So these little guys here are the connection points. Let me move over a little bit. I have one called out here. It has an address that is not set right now. It has a binding, basic HTTP, and it also has a contract, right? So then I dragged those guys out, and let's take a look at those. So here's the basic HTTP binding with some information. And then with a standard tree master detail view, I can do a little bit of archaeology, and I can see what other modules are actually, or what service endpoints are actually using this binding, or what client endpoints are using this binding, right? So I can start discovering usages of this application. And then, of course, after I have wired these components together like so, I can deploy them with F5. And there's a Dublin talk. Their slogan is what happens after F5. So this is kind of what happens before, right? OK. So that is an application. And I showed you how the goal related to the application. And I told you that this HR Hire Review module contains the workflow. Now let me follow the relationships in the model to actually prove that to you by starting to drill in here. So I have an HR Hire Review application. I can drill into the software modules that are composing it. I can go to the HR Hire Review, and I can find a web application module here. And I can find a service implementation in that guy. And then I can find a workflow service implementation. What is happening here a little bit, this is intentionally a little bit complicated. we are right now reflecting over the physical structure of the database. So we're not using views yet. So you see a little bit of an inheritance pattern here that views will collapse when we're all said and done. But the reason that I wanted to go in here is to show you that it is a real model, and also to show you that indeed I will find my flowchart executed inside the context of this module if I just drill deep enough. Right? Now, if you're a customer and I'm telling you that this is how we're tracing information, you would say, this is a little bit cumbersome. Can I not have a higher level view that makes this really easy? And that's exactly what I've built. So let me show this to you. I will go back over here, zoom out. I'll go to Kim. I told you that everything starts with a person in my organization. So I've built a custom view for her that is a diagram, and let me switch into that. It's a diagram with a preview. It shows Kim here in the center with all her tasks. And then it shows the relationships that she has to important artifacts in the system. So it shows her 3 goals, it shows the efficient hiring process, and then it finds the workflow that is actually implementing this guy, and it also finds the application that this workflow is running in. Right? So I think that's pretty fun, pretty good traceability of what's going on. Right? Now, if I start reasoning over that, I might see, okay, we actually have some comments here, and we, in these critical times here, there's a sub-goal. Let me just quickly switch that into a table view so that I can understand it a little bit better. Okay. So the sub-goal here actually said that we should consider credit checks as well in these daunting times. And then when I look at the actual implementation, I can see that hasn't really happened yet. We're just doing a background check. So I can start to tie goals and implementation artifacts together and reason over them as a whole set. Okay? So this is the first piece of Quadrant. And I'll go back to Don now. He's giving us a little bit of architecture.
Great. Thank you, Florian. So, yes, okay. Give it up for Flovo. Yeah. Flovo. So we saw the Quadrant lets people connect to this data. We saw that we're able to deal with all kinds of different data about your business goals, data about abstract processes, but also data that represents my running app and the deployed app. Right? So we saw that the dubf and dubcf artifacts and IIS artifacts have been schematized and put into the repository. And they were able to use a single tool and a single set of UI metaphors for interacting with all of that data. That actually turns out to be a pretty powerful thing once you get it, once you have it. We also saw that there were all kinds of different ways we could interact with that data. Let's talk a little bit about, because this is a PDC, we've got to talk about how it's built. Let's talk a little bit about how it's built. So Quadrant is itself a model-driven app. Right? We talk a lot about executable models or model-driven runtimes. The tool you just saw is a model-driven runtime. That is the specification of how the system works, of how the tool works, is data. That is, all of the things that control what happens in the pixels is driven by data. So what that means is the team that works on Quadrant is an M customer. They model their stuff in M. So they've schematized how UX is built as models, as domain models. Those domain models are installed in the repository, and Quadrant boots off the repository. If I remove SQL Server from that tool, Quadrant will not boot, and that's a feature. Right? The tool is completely data-driven. It's like removing MS Core EE and expecting your managed apps to run. Right? We take that deep of a dependency on SQL with the tool. So we've got all of this information schematized, including the specification of how Quadrant works as schematized data. So in amongst the things like your workflows and your business processes and your services and your blah, all the stuff that people care about, sitting right alongside of that is the specification of how Quadrant works as other domain models. By the way, also sitting in the repository is the domain model definitions themselves. While the M compiler does compile down to T-SQL, and God bless it and may it always be that way, right? We do capture lots of the things that were in the M module definition so that we can actually run queries against them and get additional information that you might have written in your M that gets lost in the compilation down to SQL. We also put things like textual and visual DSLs in there. So we have all of this schematized information that drives the tool itself. And so what I want to do now is just immediately flip back to a demo. Florian, can you show us how that data shows up in the tool and how we can use that to customize the tool?
I think I can. Yeah, so...
I don't know. Can you? I've got $1 that says you can't, Florian.
All right. So let me make that point here by going to IntelliPad quickly. Because everything in our world starts with a model, right? The reason, of course, that we made the tool model-driven is because we want you guys to customize the hell out of the experiences. You know, link them together, build new models, build custom views that are just right for your domain, right? So here is the little schema for the goals that we looked at, right? There are the business goals, then the goal itself with the owner and implemented by relationship, and all beautiful in text, and we love text. And in Quadrant, the way that looks, of course, is a little bit more graphical. So if I go back to my categories here, you can see that there are 3 categories showing up that a normal end user would not see, but that you as now extenders of the tool will definitely switch on to be visible. And those are the Quadrant schema, the Quadrant viewers, and the Quadrant shell, and the Quadrant shell models. So let me go into the Quadrant schema. I showed you in the Browse All category what the actual data was looking like. Now let's go to the schemas. So let's find the actual schema for goals that I used in the first part of the demo, and that I just showed you in M also. So you get a table view here. Notice, by the way, this little widget. I'm not using scroll bars because we looked actually very hard at how much space scroll bars are taking up if you arrange a lot of artifacts on this canvas. And we found that it is actually adding up. So instead of that, we're playing with this little invention here, where when I hold the click, I just get the affordance to scroll. Right? Here's my sample goals model. I will just drill into it on the hyper icon.
Hey, Florian, while that thing comes up, I noticed sys and information schema in that list, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, so we don't discriminate. I mean, you know, we have some favorites. I do like models that have runtimes because they make you more effective. But then again, if they don't have runtimes, maybe they make you build the right things, right? So we really don't discriminate. We just look at all the data that is in the repository, and then we allow you guys to use categories to organize them a little bit better. Here is the schema, by the way. So it has these, it has complex properties and scalar properties, things that have relationships or not. It's a little bit hard to see. I could, of course, make it bigger. But what I really want to do is I want to give you a little diagram view. And check that out. So that diagram took about 5 minutes to customize here. And what it is doing, it is not showing you only the tables that are in the gold schema, but it also calls out the other schemas that are referenced, the other tables that are referenced in other schemas, right? So the table and the flowchart link, right? So it's fun to visualize this. And we will embed the textual experience into Quadrant as well. So I will be able to right-click here and switch view and go to a textual view and then get the same IntelliPad that you've seen in the extra tool right now, right there. Because we really don't like to discriminate. Yeah, we really love all views and combinations thereof, right? You will also be able to go to a goal and say, show this to me as a textual view. And then you can just work on the goal, right? It's really pretty cool, right? We're a surface aggregator. I stress that a little bit because these diagrams are so damn powerful that people all over the world always say, oh, yeah, lines and boxes. That's Quadrant, great, right? That's not true. We will give you great lines and boxes experiences, of course, but it's all about combinations and putting things together for the task that you really have to accomplish at any given time. Okay, so this is my schema. this is what I reflected over in the standard views, right? The tool knows this intimately. But I want to close that and ask you a simple question here. Where do you think this icon is coming from? Any ideas? From the database? Well, that is true, but who put it there? Like, I can tell you T-SQL didn't. There's a set of information that you don't need when you're just a database, right? And we add that information in Quadrant as a schema-associated model to make your life a little bit easier when you're in the tool. So that is in the Quadrant schema models. There is a viewer hint here. And that viewer hint, let me find the right one. So that viewer hint is right here for the, I had it. So that viewer hint is kind of hard to find right now, right?
You're kind of wishing you had that scroll bar, aren't you?
No. I have the... It's kind of a cheap shot. It would be easier, honestly, if this thing was sorted, which it is not. So there are some reasons for that I don't want to get into. But actually, I'm setting myself up. Because it turns out that by design, once you have made a contribution to the system, our non-discrimination policy says, we treat it just like any other. If Microsoft made it, or you made it, or your wife made it, we don't care. It's all available. Of course, that becomes very unmanageable very quickly. So we're providing an add-in model as well. That is a model that shows you what are the things that I added, and that then also gives you associated functionality to deploy the artifacts and to pull them back out. So instead of trying to find my viewer hint in the sea of viewer hints here, I will go to the Quadrant shell, and I will look at the add-in model. Let's just drag that out and see it come up. Let's just take a quick look at what the add-ins are here, right? So there's some for Quadrant itself. The Quadrant schema add-in is the schema editing and viewing experience that I just showed. There's application, contract, workflow, the core domains that we will provide runtimes for. And then there's also the sample goals and organization, right? And they're siblings side by side. So this is super important for you as ISVs. You get exactly the same capabilities to customize the tool that we use to build the experiences for the domains we care about. There's no object model wall around us. Is that good? I mean, do you like that? Or? I thought that is actually fantastic. If you don't think so, I'll tell my devs they can make it private. Then Microsoft is a little bit better than you guys. Okay, I'll not do it. I'll not do it. Let's drill into the goals. Wow, I am getting slower here as I go. So here are the goals. So this is a view over those guys. Here are my viewer hints, the three of them, for business goals, goals, and sub-goals. Let me open the Explorer so that you can actually see a little bit of iconage. And now I will select the business goal hint, and that will load a form. And that has a couple of properties. So here is an entity icon, right? Let's take a look. Change that icon to, let's say, the person icon, just for the fun of it. And you see the business goals change to person here, right? These icons are, fully definable, of course, so you don't have to live with a fixed set that we gave you. And the add-in again here.
In fact, that list is populated using a query.
Yeah, the list is populated using a query, and these icons are also defined. They're actually, believe it or not, they are XAML passes stored inside the repository that we're rendering. Another thing that is interesting also is that when we look at a set of fields in a table, we really don't know which one is the key one that we should be displaying when you see it in a list. For that, again, we defined a little model here, description property. So you can see it has a name field right now. If I would go in and say description, then that would update the business goals to use description. If I had a description. Descriptions? No. Well, let's see. I think I'm just mistyping the property here. So let's drill in, see what it is really called. It's called description. Description.
You need a spell checker? I'll be your spell checker.
Yeah, there you go. Description.
Great.
So now we see the descriptions here instead of the names. Right? So you have choice on on what kind of metadata to add to make not the spatial property. Sorry. Let's go back to name. Description clearly doesn't make sense. So you have choice how to augment the schema with data that is useful in Quadrant to give your users better experiences, right? Another one that we're also thinking about is a spatial property. So if we had that, then we could show map views automatically for people, for example. And so a lot of interesting stuff there. So you have an icon now. You have a name. So your entity is a little bit familiar to the system. And now I want to look at how I actually get it to show up in this category here. I created a category business. And we do have a setting here, the entity type category catalog type. I feel a little bit bad about this. You know, they say never apologize when you give a talk. But the one feature, the one set of metadata that I would really like to have is friendly names for our tables. So they would be in the viewer hint that you've just seen. There would be a friendly singular name and a friendly plural name, localized, of course. And if I had that feature, then the tables here would look a little bit more friendly. Right now, you're really looking at the raw internals. So that's just how it is. You see the entity type category business here. And I will now say I want to actually create a new one for myself. And we offer this nice little affordance here. Whenever you can pick from a list of candidates, we allow you to also create a new one right there. So that you don't have to context switch and go to a different place to create the thing. But I can do that just right here. And I can say, create me a new one. And it will come up. And already, we have switched the entity into that new unnamed category. I want it to be at the top, of course, and I want it to be named Flovos. And there you go. The business goal is now in the Flovo category. Right? Again, I'm editing a model to give my data a nice home in the repository explorer. We will offer the capability for end users also to overlay their own organizations. Right? We're all about personalization and making things your own. So you will be able to provide some guidance as an ISV, but then users can go in and customize those guys to their liking as well. OK, so now I'm at home here. And the next thing that I want to do is I love the list experience as a basic example of how the system is working. But really, when I'm working with a system in full swing, I want it to come up as a table because that's a much better view. So the way we accomplish that is that we can register here in the system preferred viewers for entity types. Let's take a look at the business goals right now. They are configured to use the standard list whenever we encounter a collection. Right? And now I'll change this guy here to show up as a table. That's a view that I want to have. And I want to show you a second way that is really interesting, actually. I could, of course, use my selection here that you've seen me do a couple of times and edit the model behind the scenes. But we also offer UI in place to set a default view. And that UI is changing the model underneath just as if you would have added it in our configuration editing experience. Right? So watch this. Here's a standard list. Here's a set as default view. I'll click it. We write it to standard table. And from now on, whenever you open this guy, it will come up as a standard table. All right, so let's demonstrate that again here. And here we are. So this is the table, right? This is how it'll always come up from now on. Right? So the interesting principle here is that really most of the UI that we are surfacing to end users is just working against the same models that you can use targeted extender UIs to use, right? So that's very powerful because it makes it very, very cost effective for us to write a UI that end users can use. And the other thing that is cool about it is also, since it is data, we can put a little governance on these configuration settings. So if you, for example, for a certain domain, configured a view just so, and you want this to be the standard way people look at a workflow, and you don't want them to be able to change that, we can just protect the data with a little security setting on it, and that's not going to be possible for a certain class of users, right? So you get good leverage from the fact that that configuration is data, because of course we can protect data like workflows or business processes in the same way for access that we don't want to allow. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you is how I can customize a view. And you saw some view customization already. Let me go into the person record here. You saw how I switched this goal here to be a table instead of the little link with counters. And I will do something very similar right now, but I actually want to go not to the business goals. Let me go to the great people goal. So I'll drill into that. And then I'll drill into the efficient hiring process. Because I want to do something that is a little bit fun. So you see all these sections. You see this hyperlink here, evaluate an onboard employee, right? That hyperlink really is a viewer as well, right? We call that a singleton relationship viewer, right? So it's a component. And what I will now do is I will swap that out. I could use the add-in here, but we also have a developer tab, so I can show the current configuration for this viewer right in place. The idea here is that we want you to be able, as you're developing, to do this in a very small talk-like way. This is actually, sorry, this is not quite what I wanted to have. I wanted to actually go to the developer tab, to the parameters. I want to look at the property sections configuration, actually. Yeah, we want to be able for you guys to do this really side-by-side, small talk-like. So let me click on the property sections here. And you will see that there are 4 right now, right? Description, sub-goals, and implementation relationship. There's also a miscellaneous section that I've actually decided to hide. I will go into the implementation relationships. And I could say maybe how we make it work. So this is a little bit less threatening to your BA's work. And then you can see that there are a couple of other properties also. I can decide if it's expanded or not, right? Again, when we interact with the shell, it sets the same setting. And then I can look at the property configurations that we actually have in this section. So let me drill into that. And this is where I see the implemented by row in this table. Okay. And you can see I have a label, so I could call this a workflow. So that's really what it is, right? And I can update this all, right? Now, the cool thing is that I told you that we don't really discriminate against the way you combine things together. So if I wanted to, I could actually pick the flowchart diagram viewer here right in place, right? So let's do that. Right, so now in this view, you will see the diagram, right inside the form here, right? So really, your creativity and the needs of your domain can be enabled in any way. Very, very powerful combination of stuff, right? So you can make very, very targeted views for the experiences that you desire to have. Okay. This was, so far, all configuration done by data. And now I want to take this one step further. Because we like to be declarative, we like to set things with data, but we know that sometimes a configuration is just not as simple as just setting a value in a field. And for the best example that you've seen so far is actually a diagram. The way I picked the business goals and the goals and put them all on one diagram, that is not a simple property setting. So for that scenario, we're actually using queries. So let me accomplish that here. Here are the business goals, and let me go and switch that into the business goal diagram view. All right, so now from the relationships that I have in the database here, I configured this guy for myself. All right? Let me actually go to the diagram settings here and view them as shapes to be able to fit that better on the screen. All right. So now we're a nice little diagram again. Close the configurations here. And I will go into my add-in. And I'll find what we call a graph hint for business goals. And for this diagram, or for any diagram if you think about it, there are two types of queries that you really need, or two types of information. One is, what are the nodes that you see? And then the second is, how do these nodes connect to each other? All right? And I will now look at the queries for both of them. So here's a nodes query. I'm drilling in a little bit deeper, physical structure of the database. And here I have a link query. So we're using link. And let me actually drill in. Okay, and what you see here basically is a very human-readable query. It says that select me each goal in the business goals, and then select me the business goal itself. And those are the 4 nodes that you see on screen. Right? I can change that query dynamically at runtime. So for example, remember every goal had an owner. So if I wanted to see the owner, I would just edit that, and I get the owner entity. Right? Now I can drag out the owner here. And I thought that was pretty cool, too. Yeah, because you really have flexibility at your hand. I sometimes do a test with myself and then also with other developers or other people in the company to see if I'm not going too crazy on what I'm working on. And the test is basically, I ask them, how would you build what you've just seen today? This mixture of diagramming, editing on a great canvas and all that, how would you do that? How would you accomplish that? And how long would that take you to do? And so far, the answers are always encouraging, and I'm thinking I'm working on the right thing. So let me go back to the owner here and flip that back. And now I want to quickly do the edge query, which is very similar. And there we have a standard step that is kind of fun. Because essentially what the query is doing, it's just finding the from nodes and the to nodes, right? And let me drill into that. Come on. So here's the query, right? And let me just go and flip them. All right, so let's flip the to and from. And boom, now they point the other way, right? Yeah. Okay. So this is the beginning of configuration. There are a couple of things that I'll show you at the next PDC. We use queries also for actions. So when you create something new, you can run a query that then massages the data a little bit. I can actually kind of show this if I go in here and if I take a goal and drop it onto this canvas here. Notice that it comes up with a count, if it comes up. Now let's try that again. See, it says new goal 10 now, and then if I do another one, It says new goal 11. So there's actually a query, much like a stored procedure in SQL, that we're running that allows you to massage the data, right? So there are many other cool things in this framework, but I think that this is a good initial glimpse at how you can make Quadrant your own and run it in your own domains.
Thanks, Florian.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
So Florian just showed you how Quadrant is patient zero of this repository-driven application. That it's not just model-driven; it's driven out of the data in the repository. Right? We have modeled what it takes to drive the user interface, and those models include things like query. Right? Those queries that he was typing, those link expressions, those are actually also modeled and also stored in the data in the repository as structured data. We saw all customization of this product is done by insert, update, and delete, right? You don't program. There's no programmatic surface area for this tool. You do not crank up Visual Studio to go customize this. You should instead customize it from within the environment by adding and altering the data that's in the database. And we saw that query and functional evaluation is a core principle of how this whole system is built. What I want to do before we end, because we have one more little thing I want to talk about, is again, how the product is built. The product is built effectively as a big recalc engine on top of a database. So what we do is we've modeled not only the specification of the user interface, but we also have modeled the state of the user interface. So you'll notice on the bottom there are those three bodies of data. The target data that you think you're editing, you know, the workflows or the services or whatever. The specification or the configuration that drives how those things get rendered on the screen. But then also the view state of the running tool is, again, itself stored in the repository and amenable to all of these techniques. So all of the state of the tool is captured in the MDF and LDF file, the two files of the data in the index file. So one time, Florian and I were off at a briefing some analysts
that's cool,
in Florida.
Yep.
And I had a problem with my laptop where somehow or another I had a data corruption problem or I had a network connectivity problem. Basically, my machine was horked. Right? My machine was just horked. And I couldn't use Quadrant. So I called up Florian, and I'm like, oh, God, I'm going to have to repave my machine. And where's Windows 7 when you need it with the mount the VHD thing where I need it now? But Florian, God bless him, the little Steve Sinofsky inside of him came down and said, here's your VHD, and he gave me the data in the index file.
And I did that while I was very drunk, by the way. It was,
yes.
It was 1 in the morning.
Yes.
Yeah. So
kind of like this talk.
Yeah.
But he gave me the two files. I basically shut down SQL Server, copied the two files in, and man, I was just cooking with gas. It was great. The whole tool came back up. So there's so much benefit from having all of this information together in a relational store that you really, when you experience it, it's a pretty amazing thing. Yeah. Doesn't mean all the data in the world is going to be in the repository, but the tool itself is driven this way. And it makes the tool actually a much better product.
That would be cool to demo, right? Actually.
Well, dude, I don't want to tempt fate.
No?
Maybe. Let's get everything else working. So we have all this data in the database. We have
Would you guys to see this work, or?
Yeah. Fine. Fine, whatever. Go ahead. But let me finish talking. Let me finish the slide, then you can do whatever you want, okay? So on top of the repository, we have a data flow engine, which gives us an efficient query processor in memory that gives us efficient recalc, data binding. That gets wired into all the WPF visuals, which you see. I'm using a composition engine, which effectively takes composition instructions with functional expressions at the leaf nodes to wire all of this stuff together to actually drive the way WPF works inside of the shell. There's services on the left, but they're of not as much import. So why don't we flip back to Florian, and I'll let him do whatever he wants, but please just show them the basic state thing before you, because I'm afraid that
I'll show you guys something really, really fun. Because we talked about the workspace already, right? And so we have seen a lot of data-like configuration right now, where we say, configure that view, and it's kind of very static, right? I mean, it's read at runtime, and it refreshes everything and all that. But it's really things that you could also imagine authoring outside of Quadrant, right? For example, in Telepad. So where I'm going now is I'm going into the Quadrant shell area here, and I find the workspaces model, okay? And I'm on the default workspace right now. And now I'll drag the default workspace out onto the canvas. And then I will pop it so that I can see it a little bit better. And check this out. As I am zooming, like there's a zoom setting here. As I am zooming, that data is changing, right? If I want to go to 89% zoom, I can just type that in, and boom, the tool is setting that, right? So,
oh, and by the way, I can go to SQL command and do a SQL update, and it's all that data is being stored in the database.
It's all in the like I would come back to this, right? If I wanted to crash the system, then it's really hard to do, of course. But if I wanted to, I would recover just to this place. Check the grid lines out, right? There's an application UI here that says, do you want to see the grid lines? And that just edits that data, and then grid lines appear, and then I click here, and they go off again, right? If I go into and drill into the work paths that are on the canvas right now, this is all unconfigured raw editing experience. I can say, OK, let's view this as a table. And then I get to the state of all the work paths, right? So if I want to pop another one, for example, like in the top corner there, let's go over here. If I want to pop that guy, I could, right? So the selection, everything is modeled like that. And this is not just because we said, look, we really need to prove that model-driven development can actually work and that it is standing up to the industry-rich client requirements that we have. But there are real benefits. If you think about our object model, there is no boundaries, no object model. It's just data. If you're writing an action, you can look at that data. If you want to close all work paths at once, you can do that just by deleting those records, right? So the fact that we open up the whole way the tool works to data means you can use the same mechanisms that you use on target data in the tool, which is very, very powerful. But there's a little bit more also, because all this is still very geeky. You have seen a very geeky benefit, of course, that your end users might not care about too much, is that you can build all these rich views and experiences in Quadrant, right? That's very powerful. But when we were building the tool, we also had some model-driven, episodes that I want to talk to you about. When we started with a workspace, the way that really went was just we were thinking, what is changing in our computing environments? And we noticed that screens get bigger and cheaper. So we said we really want to take advantage of that. We looked at the current metaphors. Tabs were kind of useful, especially for text, but they were really not so hot if you want to compare things and if your screen gets bigger, right? Because they just slice usually in two places. So we came up with a workspace idea. And then when we had the workspaces, we noticed, wow, there's real value in the arrangements that you're creating. Tabs kind of come and go. You have something open, but you never really think about persisting them. But in the workspace, the idea to arrange things just so, and then if you dream a little bit, to bring them up on the wall display in your conference room, and use your hands to arrange them and to drill into them, which you, by the way, can see at our booth. We have a play table that is running Quadrant. Right, so we don't have it mounted to the wall yet, but and it's not huge, but we're going in that direction. So we said, wow, this is really valuable. We really want to keep this and allow people to share it and secure it and check it in somewhere. And then we were first a little bit shocked because we thought, oh man, this is going to be very expensive. Classically trained, non-model-driven, rich client developers. But then we saw, wow, this is totally cheap because it's just data. Right? I mean, it's literally just a model. So of course I can check this in. Of course I can put security on it, right? So you really get pretty good features out of this thing. I have to show you one other thing. This is just crazy. If I go into users here, it's not a good name, but it shows you what the active workspace is right now. And so if I click on the active workspace and I go to workspace 1, what do you expect will happen? Well, I'll go to workspace 1, and workspace 1 is empty, right? So it's just really, it's just working. So that's the workspace. A similar experience we had with our command space. So a pretty horrifying daunting task for a V1 that doesn't have SQUIM data yet and doesn't have any usage data is how do we best present our command space? How do we put the commands right where users can find them? And also, like, how do we allow them to customize commands? So we do usability studies, right, with that. And then maybe somebody says, hey, I actually want to change how the clipboard is working here. The clipboard commands, they don't make sense to me. I actually always expected that in the clipboard area, I would be able to switch the grid lines on and off. Right? And we love our users, so we say, OK, fine. Let's see what we can do. We have a search here, so let me search for clipboard. Let me type that correctly. So I'll find, hopefully, some clipboard definitions here in the repository. There are actually 3, which is cool. Let me take the first one. So this piece of data is actually the definition for the clipboard part in this ribbon here. So let's actually select it and change the clipboard. Oh, that's not so great. All right, so let's drill in. There's another thing that is actually kind of happening that is kind of fun. Do you see these little markers here? They're kind of hard to see, but they tell me why I found the item. Right? So if I had a workspace all set up to look over, they would tell me, hey, you know, this is why you found the clipboard. So let me actually close that, though. OK, so here's the clipboard. So I will drill into it. OK, that also doesn't work. Oh, God. So I will not change the clipboard title here. But yeah, so you have this weird cursive problem. So if you make the mistake to set a master detail as your default view in the heat of the pre-demo preparation, then you have a slight problem. But it's actually a pretty good view. So let's go and look at the 3 controls that are in here. And let's find the paste control, which is a push button, which looks like this. That's the bad boy that we actually wanted to change. And you know, we wanted to make it toggle grid lines, right? So let's toggle grid lines. And boom, now it has a toggle grid lines label. Let's pick the command, toggle grid lines. And it becomes enabled because it can, and I can now switch on the grid lines here. Right? So the whole commands are like that. Now, that of course also means that it is incredibly cheap for us to customize the ribbon for your domains, right? Now, this was kind of fun. Of course, not something we would really do. What we do really do, though, is we worry about the whole structure of the ribbon, right? So actually, let's take the grid lines off here. We really worry at what they look like. So for example, there is a developer tab right now that appeals to you guys because you're developers, but maybe it shouldn't be there. So let me go in and look at my ribbons. There's a primary design here. And I need to show you one trick, actually. So this is a good trick. Some people might not know that yet. How many people are using Office 2007? That's a great number, actually. When you double-click on the ribbon header, the ribbon collapses. And then it expands like that. So that's a good tip if you haven't discovered that yet. It's one of my favorite features. So I've done that here. Of course, the ribbon visibility is now collapsed, right? So now I have a variation tab. And you can actually see that I have 2 tabs here. But you can't really see what they are all about, right? So let me change that. I can flip this into the ribbon view. And boom, I get my ribbon as content on the canvas. Then I can do that with a variation. And I get the same. So and that variation now says, you know, I'm an alternative home, so I don't want to be like that. I have a view tab here that takes the grid line commands. I have the insert as a top-level guy instead of having it on the home. And you can now really look at those things side by side, right? You can incredibly easily switch them for usability tests, but you can also put your users in front of these ribbons and say, hey guys, which one do you like better? Did you expect that, or did you expect that? And as a result of this model-driven approach to our own shell, now really our own, we can give a better product, right? So there, yeah. So
thank you, Florian.
That's Quadrant. Yeah.
So, where are we? Quadrant's a tool, very flexible, lets me interact with diverse kinds of data. We saw that Quadrant is itself a model-driven application. The specification of how the tool works, modeled, driven out of the database. The running state of the tool, modeled, driven out of the database. So what I'd like to do now is, thank you for coming, open up this for questions. Before I do that, I'm going to bring up the Chief Pixel Officer of Oslo, Stephen Danton, in case you have any questions about how the pixels are arranged. So thank you for coming, and line up for questions at the back. There's a mic back there. Yes.
So I've got a question about, a lot of what you were talking about there was showing the relationship for configuration, but I'm interested in the relationship between the actual data, the data store, and being able to compose elements of that data together in interesting ways by the actual end user.
Sure.
So I don't know if you can show that or explain how that works.
Well, Florian actually did show you an example of taking information from diverse parts of the repository, both the people information when he had the humans in there, right, and the workflows and the activities, and he was able to construct new views by joining data information together from those two disparate pieces of data to give him a new way to interact with that information.
Now, does that actually get persisted into the model then at that point, or is it only something for the UI?
Great question.
Yeah.
It depends on how he does it. There are two ways he could have done it. He can do it by saying, I just want that for the tool. So I'm going to construct a visual DSL that pulls that together and gives me just that view. But that view only exists in the realm of Quadrant.
Right.
If as a guy who owns the repository, I'm thinking, wow, I think a lot of people are going to want to interact with those domains together, I can actually model the conjunction of those using joins that I write in the M language, install those models in the repository, and then they just show up as normal views and functions and tables.
Yeah, Don, that's right. So what I showed you was a first inkling at this power. The way we're thinking about this really is that there's going to be a mapping model also that basically can take two entities, give the relationship name, and map them together. And then you can do this super flexibly, and you also don't have to change the target models at all. And then you've seen the path we're on. There's some UI customizations that we allow you to do that affect models, and we will push that boundary further and further, so that at some point you will even be able to construct a relatively complicated diagram just by using UI gestures that are easily understandable for people.
Great.
Yeah.
Next question over here.
All right. What's the versioning and deployment story with Oslo?
The versioning and deployment story for Oslo all up. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
So the versioning, if we're writing M models, right, or if I'm writing M textual DSLs, we're working in the realm of text. Those models can be checked into your existing source code control systems. If you use TFS, God bless you. If you use Subversion or something else, God bless you too, right? All of the textual modeling information is completely friendly to the world of source code control. Live the dream. Once I compile that down and store that into the repository effectively runs as a much more runtime database. So the data in there is highly dynamic, highly volatile, and changing. If there are realms that you're working in that are fairly static, we do have the ability to extract back out into M from the relational store so that you can get it back into a textual realm where you can do your standard source code control tricks and diffing on it.
All right, thank you.
Sense? Over there.
Yes. I'm curious, in the runtime engine on the client, is there any sort of notion of a transaction where maybe multiple, I guess as I've developed systems, it seems like sometimes different entities have to interact with each other in such a way that they are invalid for a period of time while the user kind of gets all the data like he likes it, and then he hits OK and everything goes through. There's really a need for transactions. Is that something you ran into or thought about or anything like that?
Absolutely, we've run into it. The build that's on the VPCs that's on the hard drive has a relatively direct interaction style where every time you make a change, you're actually doing an update. There's some amount of batching and transactioning happening, but it's at a fairly fine-grained level. We're looking in the next milestone at alternatives to give us, to allow the data to be in a much more inconsistent state for longer periods of time. But the tool as it sits right now is pretty direct, but we know we're working on it.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess just real quick follow-up, in the context of those transactions, would you support like undo and redo as well inside of Quadrant?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a feature we just haven't shown yet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Middle.
Sorry. So now what if I want to take this and put that composition engine in my own app? And I want to say, hey, I only want to use these kind of diagrams and not force people to go to another app.
You wait till V2.
Okay.
Yep.
Next.
I don't know whether this is a valid one. It's an M question in a way. You gave things friendly names, or you gave them the ability to show what you labeled in Quadrant. Can you do that in M? Purely, when you do the queries, you can do something like my table brackets, my primary key. But if your primary keys are GUID, that's not really text user friendly.
Why do you say that? GUIDs are completely useful. 000208112, man, that's Excel. That's all I use, man. I go to Windows Start and do that. But I guess I'm in the minority. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Yeah, absolutely. The customization data that Florian was showing you in the tool, all of that is just data. We could have written that in mgraph form as just raw M data as part of our M model definition. We're working on a textual DSL so that you can write those customizations in a very friendly syntax where you get the peaks and the valleys of the visual domain showing up in the text. But absolutely, you'll be able to do it in M. You can't do it in today's build, though. But by V1, we absolutely want to be able to do all of the stuff you just did there in M.
And second, quick cheeky question. Can you export these views that you've built up in Quadrant as XAML so you can put them in and host them on other WPF-friendly surfaces?
You'll be able to export them in some file format. The exact format is TBD. But likely candidates are XAML, XML, mgraph, or the one I haven't thought of yet. But yeah, well, that's definitely a feature we want.
Yeah.
Woot.
Great. Glad you liked it. Next.
I have a question regarding security. Like, I would like to somehow bring in the context. Let's say I'm logged on as Michael on this machine, and I belong to some security group in AD, and then I don't want to see, I cannot see some stuff that is management stuff, whatever.
Then I love that question. I suggest you go to Gudgeon Sells' talk. They're going to talk about how we do security inside the repository. They'll give you a very complete and much more complete answer than I can give you right now in this little minute.
I alluded to that a little bit too, but the idea is really that we can use security for, on the configuration data for Quadrant, just like we use it on what we call target data. So absolutely, if there are certain views that you don't want to set up, that you don't want people to see, or that certain configurations that you don't want them to change, then we will probably use security for that. The UI, Quadrant UI will be disabled in those cases, and that way you can make sure that your different types of end users get exactly what they need and not anything more.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you for coming to this talk. We'll be up here if you want to ask questions, or actually we'll be out in the hall. We got to get out of here.
Yeah, we're also going to be in the lounge later,
yes.
So if you want to come by in the lounge, we'd love to talk to you.
And if you like the black balloons, Stephen is the man.
And we want to show you the surface, and we have lots of cool posters and a lot of fun over there. So seek us out.